If what you are doing is right and good, remember the words of Jonathan when he said, "Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving by many or by few."
Welcome to Mission 66, your daily journey through God's Word, powered by Bible teacher Dr. Luis Sayao and Transworld Radio. Today, we're in 1 Samuel, a book that emphasizes the importance of obedience, faith, and trusting God's plan over human ambition. Download your free study guide at mission66.org to follow along. Now, here's Esther Sisulu and our teacher, John Matthews.
Welcome to our fascinating journey in the Bible as we read along chapter by chapter with our teacher, John Matthews. Now today, we're moving through the book of 1 Samuel, and this is an Old Testament book, and we're going to focus on chapter 14, where Saul's son Jonathan steps out in faith against the Philistines. Now, the Lord has never been afraid of being outnumbered. I think we've clearly established that. And it's not hard for him to bring about a victory with only a few. In fact, our theme today is, it just takes one person.
Thanks so much, Esther, and great to be with you, and a very warm welcome to Mission 66. Wherever you join us from today, it is so good to be with you as we reach 1 Samuel chapter 14, where Saul has just been anointed king of Israel and is facing imminent disaster in the face of the advancing Philistines. And toward the end of chapter 13, we just get a little glimpse of the situation facing Israel. Now, there's not a single blacksmith to be found anywhere in the land of Israel, because the Philistines had said, well, if they have a blacksmith, then the Hebrews will make swords or spears. So all metalwork was controlled by the Philistines, and Israel have no weapons to speak of. So the Israelites had to go to the Philistines to have their metal farm implements sharpened. Now let's see what happens here in chapter 14. One day, Jonathan, the son of Saul, said to the young man who carried his armor, "Come, let us go over to the Philistine garrison on the other side." But he did not tell his father. Now Saul was staying in the outskirts of Gibeah in the pomegranate cave at Migron, and the people who were with him were about 600 men, including Ahijah, the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, son of Phinehas, son of Eli, the priest of the Lord in Shiloh, wearing an ephod. And the people did not know that Jonathan had gone. Within the passes by which Jonathan sought to go over to the Philistine garrison, there was a rocky crag on the one side and a rocky crag on the other. The name of the one was Bozez, which means to shine, and the name of the other was Sina, which means acacia. The one crag rose on the north in front of Michmash, and the other on the south in front of Geba. Jonathan said to the young man who carried his armor, "Come, let us go over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us, for nothing can hinder the Lord from saving by many or by few." And his armor-bearer said to him, "Do all that is in your heart. Do as you wish. Behold, I am with you, heart and soul." And then Jonathan said, "Behold, we will cross over to the men, and we will show ourselves to them. If they say to us, 'Wait until we come to you,' then we will stand in our place, and we will not go up to them. But if they say, 'Come up to us,' then we will go up, for the Lord has given them into our hand, and this shall be the sign to us." So both of them showed themselves to the garrison of the Philistines, and the Philistines said, "Look, Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they have hidden themselves." And the men of the garrison hailed Jonathan and his armor-bearer, saying, "Come up to us, and we will show you a thing." And Jonathan said to his armor-bearer, "Come up after me, for the Lord has given them into the hand of Israel." Then Jonathan climbed up on his hands and his feet, and his armor-bearer after him. And they fell before Jonathan, and his armor-bearer killed them after him. And that first strike which Jonathan and his armor-bearer made killed about 20 men within, as it were, half a furrow's length in an acre of land. And there was a panic in the camp, in the field, and among all the people. The garrison and even the raiders trembled, the earth quaked, and it became a very great panic. Sometimes it takes just one brave soul to stand up and say, let's do what the Lord wants us to do. One person taking action, encouraging others to join the cause. And because God was with Jonathan, and indeed with his faithful armor-bearer, they won this incredibly unlikely victory, which was about to become a bit of a rout. Verse 16. And the watchmen of Saul in Gibeah of Benjamin looked, and behold, the multitude was dispersing here and there. And then Saul said to the people who were with him, count and see who has gone from us. And when they had counted, behold, Jonathan and his armor-bearer were not there. So Saul said to Ahijah, bring the ark of God here. For the ark of God went at that time with the people of Israel. Now, while Saul was talking to the priest, the tumult in the camp of the Philistines increased more and more. So Saul said to the priest, withdraw your hands. In other words, never mind bringing the ark. Then Saul and all the people who were with him rallied and went into the battle. And behold, every Philistine's sword was against his fellow, and there was very great confusion. And all of this because one person stood up and took action. This has happened before, hasn't it? Gideon in the book of Judges, who goes up against a great army with just 300 chosen men, and the Lord caused the opposing forces to fight among themselves until they're either destroyed or they scatter. And now, once Jonathan had begun this battle by himself, it was evident that God was with him, was on his side. And so more and more people join in the fight because everybody becomes brave when victory is in sight. Verse 21. Now the Hebrews who had been with the Philistines before that time and who had gone up with them into the camp, even they also turned out to be with the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. Likewise, when all the men of Israel who had hidden themselves in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines were fleeing, they too followed hard after them in battle. So the Lord saved Israel that day, and the battle passed beyond Beth-aven. Now, the reason they're winning here is because of one person, and that one person is Jonathan. But now we begin seeing King Saul, Jonathan's father. Well, he starts to show poor judgment. Verse 24. And the men of Israel had been hard pressed that day. So Saul had laid an oath on the people, saying, cursed be the man who eats food until it is evening, and I am avenged on my enemies. None of the people had tasted food. Now when all the people came to the forest, behold, there was honey on the ground. And when the people entered the forest, behold, the honey was dropping. But no one put his hand to his mouth, for the people feared the oath. But Jonathan had not heard his father charge the people with the oath, so he put out the tip of the staff that was in his hand and dipped it into the honeycomb and put his hand to his mouth, and his eyes became bright. Then one of the people said, your father strictly charged the people with an oath, saying, cursed be the man who eats food this day. And the people were faint. And then Jonathan said, my father has troubled the land. See how my eyes have become bright, because I have tasted a little of this honey. How much better if the people had eaten freely today of the spoil of their enemies that they found. For now the defeat among the Philistines has not been great. And they struck down the Philistines that day from Michmash to Aijalon, and the people were very faint. The people pounced on the spoil, and they took sheep and oxen and calves and slaughtered them on the ground, and the people ate them with the blood. Then they told Saul, "Behold, the people are sinning against the Lord by eating with the blood." And he said, "You have dealt treacherously. Roll a great stone to me here." And Saul said, "Disperse yourselves among the people and say to them, let every man bring his ox or his sheep and slaughter them here and eat. And do not sin against the Lord by eating with the blood." So every one of the people brought his ox with him that night, and they slaughtered them there. And Saul built an altar to the Lord. It was the first altar that he built to the Lord. Isn't there a contrast between the mood and the approach of Jonathan and that of Saul? And Saul knew the law of Moses and God's instructions concerning the eating of blood, but he was not careful at all with other commands of God. And he makes a rash vow that hinders the army from total victory, again taking control. And he begins to notice a distance forming between himself and God. Verse 36. Then Saul said, "Let us go down after the Philistines by night and plunder them until the morning light. Let us not leave a man of them." And they said, "Do whatever seems good to you." But the priest said, "Let us draw near to God here." And Saul inquired of God, "Shall I go down after the Philistines? Will you give them into the hand of Israel?" But God did not answer him that day. Why not? Well, because in his pride Saul had made a rash vow that anyone who ate anything that day would be cursed. It seems like a pointless vow, and it was. It was a silly vow. And even though Jonathan didn't know about the vow that his father had made, a king's vow had been broken when he tasted that honey. And so those things combined, it's serious enough that God does not answer now Saul's inquiry. Maybe God sees at this point again Saul's heart and does not trust his motivation. Saul knew at that point that someone had broken the vow, and so Saul now becomes absorbed with finding out who. Verse 38. And Saul says, "Come here, all you leaders of the people, and know and see how this sin has arisen today. For as the Lord lives, who saves Israel, though it be in Jonathan my son, he shall surely die." But there was not a man among all the people who answered him. Then he said to all Israel, "You shall be on one side, and I and Jonathan my son will be on the other." And the people said to Saul, "Do what seems good to you." Therefore Saul said, "O Lord God of Israel, why have you not answered your servant this day? If this guilt is in me or in Jonathan my son, O Lord God of Israel, give Urim. But if this guilt is in your people Israel, give Thummim." And Jonathan and Saul were taken, but the people escaped. Then Saul said, "Cast the lot between me and my son Jonathan." And Jonathan was taken. Then Saul said to Jonathan, "Tell me what you have done." And Jonathan told him, "I tasted a little honey with the tip of the staff that was in my hand. Here I am. I will die." And Saul said, "God do so to me and more also. You shall surely die, Jonathan." Saul should have been glad his son had wrought such a victory, but instead he calls for him to be killed because he'd violated Saul's pointless and rash vow. Fortunately, the people of Israel rescued Jonathan from being killed. Here in verse 45, the people said to Saul, "Shall Jonathan die, who has worked this great salvation in Israel? Far from it. As the Lord lives, there shall not one hair of his head fall to the ground, for he has worked with God this day. So the people ransomed Jonathan, so that he did not die. Then Saul went up from pursuing the Philistines, and the Philistines went to their own place. And when Saul had taken the kingship over Israel, he fought against all his enemies on every side, against Moab, against the Ammonites, against Edom, against the kings of Zobah, and against the Philistines. And wherever he turned, he routed them. And he did valiantly and struck the Amalekites and delivered Israel out of the hands of those who plundered them. And as we skip to verse 52, the final verse, it says, there was hard fighting against the Philistines all the days of Saul. And I think there's a couple of things that we should notice here, Esther, before I come to you for some questions. First, the battle against the Philistines is ongoing. Then Saul, this impulsive king with very little clear direction, appears as someone who's becoming increasingly disconnected, not only from God, but from his very own son, whom God has clearly been with and honoured because of his heart. And so Jonathan makes this risk to approach the Philistine army off and on his own initiative without telling his dad. And because of that, well, he should have been given a medal for bravery, shouldn't he? Instead, pride fills his father's heart, and compounding a mistake with another mistake, that vow that was meaningless, he then compounds with being ready to kill his own son.
Well, thanks, John. And this is Mission 66. I am your host, Esther. And now that we're here, we're in this part of the program, I think my first question, John, to you is whether there were other reasons why God didn't answer Saul's inquiry.
Well, yeah, good question. At first glance, Esther, we're led to believe that it was because his oath was violated. But on deeper inspection, we see that Saul doesn't really depend much on God at all or give him any credit. And his heart reveals jealousy, pride, and really, we pretty quickly discern that it is all about Saul. And it might have been that God had simply withdrawn his favour from Saul because he sees that this guy's going to be beleaguered and crippled by pride. And it's interesting that the person who brings the priestly garment is Ahijah, who is the son of Ahitub, the brother of Ichabod, and the grandson of Phinehas, who was the wicked son of Eli. And God, if you remember, removed Eli and his sons from the priesthood. Later, Saul orders the ark of God to be brought, but in verse 19, when the panic begins in the Philistine camp, he says, no, never mind the ark. And maybe that reflects Saul's careless, superficial attitude toward the ark of the Lord. And it is in stark contrast with the lovely faith and bravery and enabling spirit. You know, there's just a different feel to the character of Jonathan altogether. You know, you kind of, as you read the passage, you're thinking you don't want to be around Saul. You're not sure around him, whereas Jonathan is a much more reassuring presence, okay? And he acts decisively because he wants to do God's will. And it's commended and it's honoured by God.
So earlier on, you talked about the casting of lots and the Urim and the Thummim. Hey, I think right now let's go ahead and take some time to cover those subjects.
Yeah, we've mentioned it plenty of times, haven't we, on Mission 66, but it's an important point to make, and it's a situation where the priests are empowered by God to give answers to inquiries of the leaders through the use of this Urim and the Thummim. These are two pretty mysterious objects. They're effectively rocks or wooden items, two of them carried in a pocket in the priestly vestment. And even though we don't exactly know how this was done, those two objects were used by God to give yes or no answers, or they'd be able to decide between one person or another, or one group or another. And in this case, it was Saul on the one side, Jonathan on the other, and the entire rest of Israel on the other. So the Urim and the Thummim pointed initially to Saul and Jonathan, and then between Saul and Jonathan, it's pointed out Jonathan, who was the one who broke the oath.
So interesting. Something that I can't get out of my mind that the text mentions was that there were only 2 swords in the entire army. I mean, my goodness, how was that even possible that they could only have 2 swords?
Yeah, it's hard to get your head around that one, isn't it? Well, the Philistines controlled the technology here of smelting iron from ore and then forging weapons with that. Previous episode or previous chapter says that they even charged the Hebrews fees, pretty pricey fees actually as well, for sharpening farm implements for them, because that's all they had. And so we learn that there are only 2 swords in the entire army. And in that chapter, you might remember there was a subtle reference to it that Jonathan had one and Saul had the other.
Quite honestly, John, it seems impossible that they would have won such a decisive battle with only 2 swords. It's unheard of.
Yeah, quite right, Esther. But God, those 2 words again, as he has done before, he intervenes and causes this sense of panic amongst the Philistines. And despite Saul nearly messing things up, and despite his decline, if you could call it that, because I think that's what's happening, God still grants Israel victory, even though the victory was not as comprehensive as it would have been had Saul not been involved. He still grants them victory, despite the fact as well that the Philistines had all the latest weapons.
Well, God is faithful in that way. And, it's incredible to see. But here's another question that I think our listeners might be curious about. And that is whether Saul could have repented and come back into God's good graces. And I ask this because we know that God can forgive any sin.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll see how the story of Saul progresses and how there are times when he seems to do that. But again, it seems to be that it's all about Saul. And so when it suits him or when he needs it, then he turns to God for help. But generally, he's ploughing his own way forward. We also know, don't we, that there is this sense of freeing forgiveness when we turn to God. But we also see that sin carries consequences. And so Adam and Eve's sin may well have been forgiven, but it still meant that they were expelled from the garden. King David commits adultery and murder in the Bathsheba affair, and he was sincerely repentant and sorrowful. And God accepted his repentant heart and saw his sorrow as so genuine and didn't remove him as king. But the consequences of that incident were significant and really impacted him to his death. Saul may well have been forgiven, but he didn't demonstrate a repentant heart before God. And once he had shown himself to be unreliable, untrustworthy, the consequence now that he was no longer qualified to lead the nation. He couldn't be trusted.
John, this was a really great study, and I think it's been imprinted or perhaps even re-imprinted on my heart that there really are consequences to our actions, but God is gracious. Well, I just want to thank you for walking us through this chapter. And how should we summarize what we've learned in 1 Samuel chapter 14?
Yeah, let's do that, Esther, now. And we're beginning to see here that Saul was increasingly hostile to God's leadership in his own life in the face of increasing threats from the warlike Philistines as well. But Saul's son Jonathan has a different heart. He's willing and confident in God's leadership and is able to act on his own. And our theme today was sometimes it just takes one person. When the will of God is plain and the course of action to be taken is pretty clear, it may just take that one person to have the courage to get the ball rolling. I'd like us to consider the power of one. You may not consider yourself to be a leader in your home, your workplace, your school, your community, your church, your neighborhood. But all around us are things being done that are not right. And everybody's saying somebody needs to do something about this. Maybe everybody around you, maybe they're waiting for one person to stand up and do what is right. What's wrong with that somebody being you? If what you are doing is right and good, remember the words of Jonathan here when he said, "Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving by many or by few." Sometimes it takes just one person to start a great thing, and others will follow.
Well, that is certainly a wonderful way to wrap up our episode of Mission 66. And thank you so much for joining us. As always, tune in next time, same place, as we take you further into the book of 1 Samuel. If you have any questions, if perhaps you have a comment that you'd like to share about this episode, find us on our social media platforms. We are on Facebook and on Instagram at Mission 66. We look forward to connecting with you on our social platforms. Well, until next time, dear friend, from myself, Esther, from John, our teacher, and our team, goodbye and God bless you.
Has God used today's program in your life? Then you'll want to receive the free study guide that's waiting for you on our website. You can get it right away by downloading it at mission66.org. At mission66.org, you can also leave a comment or make a donation to help this listener-supported ministry. When you give, you're helping listeners experience solid Bible teaching in many languages in some of the most spiritually resistant places in the world. Thank you for helping at mission66.org. Mission 66 is a ministry of Transworld Radio.